Back in 2014, I used the Uber app a lot. I couldn't drive for a year because of some DUI charges, a dumb mistake on my part. There's this nightclub in my town where I'd sometimes hang out with friends on the weekends. If we didn't have a designated driver, we'd usually grab an Uber. One particular night I wasn't feeling great, so I decided to leave early, sometime between 1 and 2 a.m. It was far too cold to walk home, so I called for an Uber. The app matched me with a driver named Alex. I'll admit, his profile photo gave me an uneasy vibe. He looked older, wasn't smiling, and had a greyish goatee and a black beanie. Still, he was only a couple of miles away, so I figured it was fine. He drove a Chevy Malibu, which sounded decent enough. I waited outside the club, on a bench near the bouncer, who stood motionless with his arms crossed. About 5 minutes later, a beat-up, silver Chevy Malibu from the early 2000s pulled up. I was a little disappointed by the car's condition. It was old and shabby looking. The driver didn't call me over, honk or anything. He just sat there at the curb. I got in the back seat, and the atmosphere immediately felt off. He didn't greet me, shake my hand, or even glance back. The only thing he said, in a quiet, monotone voice, was, "Where you headed?" I gave him my address, and we started driving. But instead of heading toward my place, he went down Main Street in the opposite direction. I pointed this out, and he turned at the next intersection. That's when things got even stranger. He veered off the main roads and into quieter residential streets. I noticed he hadn't entered my address into his phone, which made me feel uneasy. Not sure if he expected me to guide him, I entered my address into my own GPS and let the voice directions play. When it said, "Turn left at the next street," he completely ignored it and kept going. I gestured in confusion and he finally spoke up. "I just gotta make a quick stop. Don't worry, I'll give you a discount." Even though I was drunk, I could tell something was seriously wrong. That's when I noticed a handgun sticking out of the glove box next to the driver. My mind raced as I tried to figure out how to get out of the car. At the next red light, I quietly tested the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The child lock was on. My heart started pounding. We were way off course, miles from my house, probably 2 towns over by then. Desperation set in. I couldn't call the police. I didn't know what this man might do if he noticed. My only option seemed to be trying to flip the child lock switch located near the front seat, but to do that I had to slide across the back seat to position myself behind him without drawing attention. It was one of the most tense moments of my life. I locked my eyes on his reflection in the rearview mirror, watching for any sign that he might look back. Slowly, I slid behind him. Miraculously, he didn't notice. Now came the most terrifying part, reaching for the switch at the next red light before he could react. As we approached intersection after intersection, I felt the tension mounting with every light. Finally, one turned yellow. The car slowed to a stop at an empty intersection, the perfect place to make my move. A single car sat on the opposite side of the street, which gave me a faint sense of safety. Summoning all my courage, I reached for the illuminated child lock switch. The driver jumped in his seat, startled, and screamed at me. Just as I had feared, he reached for the gun. Acting on pure adrenaline, I managed to open the door and bolt out of the car. I ran to the nearest vehicle, a Cadillac Escalade, banging on the windows and pleading for help. To my dismay, they drove off, completely ignoring me. But it didn't matter. The man in the Chevy Malibu sped away down the block. Panicked, I sprinted to a nearby 24-hour grocery store. Once inside, I called a taxi to take me home. The experience was so sobering that by the time I got into the store, I didn't feel drunk at all. Later, I reported the driver to Uber. They assured me the case would be escalated to the authorities. A week later, an officer came to my house for questioning, but that was the last I heard about it. I have no idea what happened to that driver, but I haven't used Uber since. As a former Uber driver, I've encountered my fair share of difficult passengers, from rowdy, drunken groups on Saturday nights to people faking disabilities to score free rides. But every now and then you pick up someone who's just undeniably creepy. Out of all the unsettling experiences I've had, none compare to the night I gave a ride to a man named Tom. It was a Friday night in December, one of the coldest nights of the year. I didn't have any plans, so I decided to make some extra cash by doing late-night pickups. This happened 2 years ago when I was 18 and driving a new Honda Accord. My parents had spoiled me a bit with that car, but I was a skinny kid, and my dad insisted I keep a blade in the vehicle just in case someone dangerous got in. Around 10 p.m., I accepted a ride request from a guy named Tom, who was a couple of miles away at a large shopping center. When I arrived, I noticed a group of teenagers loitering near the entrance, and they immediately caught my attention in the worst way. They seemed rowdy, and I hoped Tom wasn't among them. Some of them stared as I slowly passed by, making me feel uneasy. I sped up and drove deeper into the parking lot, wanting to avoid the group altogether. I circled the parking lot twice, scanning for anyone who looked like they might be my passenger. Finally, through my side mirror, I noticed someone walking toward my car from behind. I rolled down my window and called out, "Tom." He responded with a quiet, "Yes." "Hop in," I said. I had to repeat myself 3 times before he finally understood. His hesitation made the situation awkward from the start. When he finally got in, he chose the seat directly behind me instead of sitting diagonally, as most passengers did. This always made me a bit uneasy. It's harder to keep an eye on someone sitting right behind you, especially if they give off a weird vibe. Tom looked to be in his late 40s, and his appearance didn't help ease my nerves. He reeked of cigarettes, and before long, my car started smelling like an ashtray. I asked him where he needed to go, and he gave me an address about 10 miles away. It was a decent fare, so I didn't mind. As we started driving, I tried making small talk to lighten the mood. It didn't go well. Whenever I asked a yes or no question, his responses were barely audible, and anything more open-ended was met with curt, one-word answers. After a while, he completely ignored one of my questions, so I stopped trying to engage. By the 6-mile mark, the air in the car felt heavy. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I avoided glancing in the rearview mirror because I was almost certain he was staring at me. I stole a quick half-second glance in the rearview mirror and confirmed my fear. He was staring directly at me. My foot instinctively pressed harder on the gas. I just wanted this ride to be over. By the 8-mile mark, I realized we were in the middle of nowhere. The street was nearly deserted, bordered by dense woods, with only the occasional dark, empty-looking building. My unease deepened. The address he'd given me seemed suspicious. While still driving, I swiped at my phone to pan the map, tracing the route to its destination. The address led to a dead-end street with no surrounding roads or visible structures nearby. My nerves were shot as I glanced again at the mirror. He was still staring. Summoning courage, I asked if the address he'd provided was his home. There was a long, uncomfortable silence. I thought he either hadn't heard me or was ignoring me again. After what felt like an eternity, he finally muttered yes. We were now less than a mile from the address. Still surrounded by nothing but woods and the occasional desolate building, I approached the dead-end road, desperately hoping to see houses or signs of life. As I slowed down to get a better look, all I could see was pitch-black emptiness. Dread gripped me as I imagined why he'd want to bring me out here, so far from anyone or anything. Feigning a mistake, I drove past the street, pretending I hadn't noticed it. I hoped he wouldn't catch on, but he did. He immediately leaned forward, shouting at me to turn around. My heart raced. Feeling like my life was on the line, I quickly apologized and executed a 3-point turn. As I approached the dead-end road again, I reached into the netted compartment on the side of my seat where I kept my blade. Quietly and discreetly, I flicked it open, clutching it tightly in my right hand, ready for anything. I turned down the road, my headlights illuminating exactly what I feared. Nothing but trees on either side. At the end of the street, it was just emptiness. No houses, no buildings, nothing. I braced myself, both physically and mentally, for whatever was about to happen. Breaking the silence, he said softly, "Thanks for the ride." He opened his door, but before stepping out, he added, "Could you get out of the car for a second? I need help carrying my bag. I have a bad back." The problem was, he didn't have a bag. I knew he hadn't brought one with him. My voice shook as I replied, Yeah, sure. Let yourself out, and I'll help you in a sec." The fear was too obvious in my tone. What happened next was something I couldn't have predicted. Suddenly, I felt his hands wrap around my neck from the back seat. It took me a moment to realize he was choking me. Acting on pure instinct, I drove the blade into his left arm. He screamed in pain and released his grip, falling out of the car onto the street. Without hesitation, I seized the chance to turn my car around and floored it back down the road until I reached a busy intersection. I didn't call the police. I was too shaken to think clearly. By the time I got home, all I wanted to do was sleep and forget the entire ordeal. Needless to say, that was the end of my Uber driving days.